Havlicek steals it. Havlicek stole the ball. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
United to Amici. Amici powers in.
Gibson swings. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable! I don't believe what I just saw.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for SportsCentury. There was a primitive quality to him that was riveting. He crouched behind his defensive line, steam coming from his mouth, ready to pounce. Considered by many the greatest middle linebacker of all time, Dick Butkus looked like what a linebacker was supposed to look like. But he was also a complex man who struggled to find an identity off the field.
Dick Butkus was a Superman. He was unbelievable. He just hated people, and he just wanted to kill them and kill a quarterback.
The idea is to utterly demoralize, demolish. Butkus's dream was to hit somebody so hard their head flew off.
I think the play of the game, and I've always said this, that you have to have a Neanderthal gene. Butkus had two.
It was this focused kind of violence that it brought him a certain kind of joy. And you could see it on his face as he played. He had passion with his eyes darting left and right.
He also was hard of hearing. He always went after the whistle stopped. He never stopped when the whistle blew.
I can recall catching a pass, and there was Butkus. And during that era, the peace sign was very popular because of the war. And he got me in a headlock and made a little peace sign and commenced to try to gouge my eyes out.
It's always messing around. I come up to get over the ball, and somebody spit on the ball. Well, Butkus is back there giggling, and I tell the official, and the official doesn't do anything about it. And a couple plays later, I come up, and Butkus is giggling again, and he spit on the ball again.
Dick would run up into the line and start growling and just, making noise. And I can remember one time while calling signals, Ed Flanagan was our center saying, "Shut up, Dick, so I can't hear the signals."
I remember when O.J. Simpson was in the league, I said, what was it like playing against Butkus? And he said, whenever I got the ball, I kept looking around saying to myself, where is he? Where is he? Everybody was terrified.
I would talk to him and accuse him of some of the things, the biting and the gouging at the eyes, and he'll flat out deny it. It was almost like he was in a coma, he was out of himself. He'll flat out deny. I never did that. I never did that.
Dick was in such a zone when he played that when he was off the field and came down from the excitement and the level at which he played, he didn't remember a lot of that stuff.
Dick Butkus said before a game, he would pick out somebody on the other sideline and imagine that that person had done something to his family, done something to his mom, so that he could really hate them when the game started.
He did this knowing that he was fooling himself, but using the device that an actor uses to get himself up for a role by imagining that he is that person in that story.
I was dead serious. Football was my life. It was like a release for me. I swore that if I was going to die, let it be on the field here.
To watch him on a football field was to watch a man showing everybody how a middle linebacker should play. Everything was very contained. That football field was to him like the chessboard was to Bobby Fischer.
It's like looking at a Van Gogh as opposed to a Dali. It was flow, it was movement. And when the ball was snapped, he instinctively knew where to go. It was the sixth sense that he had about the game.
He would go almost sideline to sideline. Butkus would almost hurdle himself through the air occasionally to make a tackle, almost like a missile.
A Butkus tackle is a classic tackle. It's a textbook type of thing where you drive through the ball carrier and the ball carrier ends up going backwards.
He's rough as hell. He wouldn't tackle you like a normal linebacker would. He would wrap his arms around you and engulf you He had nowhere to go.
From 1965 to 1973, the sounds of Dick Butkus making tackles echoed across the playing fields of the NFL like cannon fire. And when he retired, a Chicago Bear forever, they told stories about him around the campfires.
Anyone whose name has all those percussive sounds in it, Butkus, is not going to be playing in a tutu. He had the body, he had the name, he had the neck.
It seemed like his face was always like too big for the helmet, stuck out, and he always had this, I don't know how the heck he did it. I mean, there was always blood trickling down that one side.
He looked like an animal who was going to hurt you bad, and he liked that. He wanted people to think that. He wanted people to know that he was coming.
That was all for effect. He understood the entertainment value of it very early. But certainly, if somebody said he got bit at the bottom of the pile and it must have been Butkus, then I'm sure Butkus would probably not deny that just to keep up the image.
In most people's minds, he is still the most powerful symbol of the violent nature of the game.
People in pro football constantly will use Butkus' name as an adjective almost in talking about how tough a player is, regardless of his position.
Butkus was incomparable. Strange guy, a violent guy. His attitude was not siege mentality, but ramparts mentality. He strode the ramparts. That's what he did behind the line. And he didn't challenge the opposition, he threatened them.
In the last minute of a game in Detroit on October 24th, 1971, a wide receiver named Chuck Hughes collapsed on the field and died. Many presumed that the 6'3", 245-pound Butkus was responsible. He wasn't. He was a victim of his reputation.
I was back in coverage, and I saw like Hughes walking toward me and just had this weird color, and down he went. Our doctors were the closest ones to where he was, so I started waving him in.
Butkus had the image of being the last guy who would call for help for anybody. Well, here was a guy who was actually dead on the field. Something you never want to imagine.
I was a good maybe 10 yards away and had my hands on my hips. Someone from the end zone had maybe a long lens and took a shot of it. It's like Butkus finally did it.
There were people in Detroit who said Butkus must have hit him. Butkus is a killer. Butkus even got hate mail from Detroit.
People immediately, when they hear Butkus' name or saw him do something, they were looking for the bad in it, not for what really was transpiring. He was really recognizing that Hughes was in trouble and that he wanted some help out there.
Dick understood what was going on. When he came to the funeral, all the players went over and thanked him for that.
Because he was big and because he sounded gruff, everybody thought he was rough. And the word animal used to really bother him. So he's a very sensitive person underneath.
I think that he felt intimidated by his own reputation for intimidation. I think that he felt that people largely misunderstood him.
Butkus was very difficult. It was very difficult to get him to talk. He said, gee, great game, Dick. Thanks. Yeah. The man would not expound on anything outside of answering your questions.
He wanted to do his talking on the field through his play. We coaches, we hardly even got a hello out of him. He was just very, very focused.
I think he was feeling, for part of his life, inadequate, feeling like, he was on a different playing field with people. He studied and did things in his competitive nature to bring himself up to being at least equal, in many cases, surpassing people.
Switch.
Dick Butkus was born into a Lithuanian family of modest means on December 9th, 1942, on the far south side of Chicago in a section called Roseland. Growing up the youngest of 8 children, he learned self-reliance from his parents, John and Emma.
We grew up in a working-class, blue-collar neighborhood that was primarily an ethnic area. Every 4 or 5 blocks you went into a different nationality. Most of them being of European background. Steel mills were the primary employers.
I think there was a lot of love in that family. They all pulled together.
They had to. It was very tough for Mrs. Butkus to feed that clan. The Butkus family is all a big physical family, and Dick was kind of the skinny runt, being the last of the group, but he developed very quickly.
His mother was an interesting person. She could get rough and she could speak up for the family. I think part of Dick's competitive spirit comes from her. She just assumed that everybody could be a star.
He loved his father a great deal, but it was his mother to whom he went with any kind of problem. And Dick would pour things out to her. She would listen.
My dad was the real quiet one. He'd never say two words. Ma was the boss. She told you to do something, you did it. No questions asked.
His father was an immigrant, came over on Ellis Island from New York, from Lithuania, and he spoke very broken English. He'd be looking at the paper from the back to the front, but he couldn't read. But he was just like looking at the paper.
Dick communicated him, I think, but he communicated with him more by looking at him and understanding what his dad was trying to say in a nonverbal way.
His father would come down the street carrying his lunch bucket, and he would stop and he would smile and go into the house. That was 1,000 words to Dick from his father.
Dick was almost nonverbal growing up. I was one of the few people that he really conversed with. At school, he always had his head down. He walked with his head down and was very, very shy. Said very little to teachers.
He was inside himself. I think it's just something you develop when you're left to your own devices, and even though you're in a family that had a lot of members, as the youngest, he was lonely.
Shy outside to other people, but not with the people I was close to. You really had to prove your trust to me that you were loyal. Then it was okay. I don't know why that was. I don't know.
Introverted and often alone, Butkus found a friend for a lifetime in football. In his yard and at nearby Fernwood Park, he immersed himself in the game.
At Fernwood, he would play alone. He would go to the park and he would run through the trees and spin off the trees, and he would kick the football and he would run it back.
It's hard to play by yourself, so I would just manufacture and do things and do it late at night because probably being shy, I don't want anybody seeing, probably being afraid that people think, you're a little off center.
In that large family of guys, Dick got lost somewhere. Football was for him a way of expression to free himself from being lost within that family.
In 1956, Butkus was introduced to organized football. He attended Chicago Vocational High School, even though he had to take 2 buses to get there. He chose it because its football program was renowned.
At Chicago Vocational School, he was bigger than anybody, better than anybody. He was like a man playing against boys.
He was like Gulliver. I mean, he was huge then. He was the biggest name in high school football in the years that he played.
We had heard that he was the toughest guy that ever played the game. We heard rumors about him biting people. We heard rumors about all kinds of different things.
His restlessness sometimes landed him in trouble. As a junior, Butkus was arrested and spent 2 nights in a juvenile detention center after being caught red-handed while stealing a part off a hot rod. He was sentenced to a year of probation. That served as his epiphany.
That was the make-or-break point, and his mother and father were deeply embarrassed and ashamed that their son had gotten arrested. If you're first generation, you're driven by the obsessiveness of a mother and father who made sacrifices to come to this country to start a new life. Dick had this imperative. So if you put the imperative together with the imagination and the loneliness, you come up with one obsessive guy.
All of a sudden it hit Dick. Oh my God, if I pull this one more time, my whole career is going to be over.
In the spring of 1961, Dick Butkus enrolled at the University of Illinois on a football scholarship. He was 100 miles from home, and because freshmen were ineligible, he didn't have the comfort of games. So a lonely young man became even lonelier and more withdrawn.
He sat in the back row, and he struck me as a very large man. And all the Chicago students sort of sat in a semicircle around him. His first paper in freshman English, "Why did you come to Illinois?" And his was that he had come to Illinois to play football, and he was going to take us to a Rose Bowl.
I think he just was trying to figure it all out. I think it was such a much bigger deal than what we all thought when we came to Illinois.
He endured the classrooms, but his real refuge was on the practice field.
The first day of practice that Dick was on the field, all of our coaches watched him go through drills in the first scrimmage that we had. And it was very clear that here with us was going to be the opportunity to coach the best linebacker that had maybe ever played.
He made 2 or 3 tackles immediately on inside running plays, but then we ran a bootleg pass, and he ran stride for stride with that man going across. Never practiced his play. He just instinctively went right with him, intercepted the pass. We said, he'll do.
I think it might have been 1 or 2 practices that everybody on that field knew there was one king of the jungle, and he was a freshman.
In June of 1963, Butkus married his high school sweetheart. Helen was a stabilizing influence, and he played with the fury of something unleashed, both as a center and middle linebacker. As a junior, he made 145 tackles and caused 10 fumbles, while leading Illinois to a Rose Bowl victory and a number 3 spot in the rankings.
After the Rose Bowl, I think he became much more comfortable, much more verbal, and enjoyed the experience.
I think it was like a secret happiness that they did win the Rose Bowl. I'm sure he was happy, but he doesn't show it a lot. He thinks that I don't need a lot of thank yous because this is what I'm supposed to do.
In August, just before his senior year, he's been made All-American junior year. His life is good. He's at ease with everything. Maybe the first time ever. There was also this blossoming articulation and ease. And SI sends a writer out, Dan Jenkins, very good writer. And Dan spends a couple of days with him and Helen.
He was interviewed for 3 or 4 days, followed him to classes, went every place with him. Dick did everything he could, be accommodating, and he was. But the story came out making him look like an animal, and it was not the true Dick Butkus.
And it was just, it had that attitude toward it. But it was a perfectly legitimate story by Jenkins. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. He had his own take on things and portrayed Dick as being this dumb jock who didn't care anything but football.
Dick apparently said words to the effect that if he wanted to be a doctor, he would study to be a doctor. But he wanted to play football, and that's why he had come to Illinois. And the words came out that he said, if I was smart enough, I would be a doctor, but I'm not, and I'm going to play football.
The school, the academians, were infuriated. In their judgment, it made Illinois look like a football factory, and that made Butkus look like someone who didn't belong in their university. He had to apologize. I would say it was a loss of innocence.
And from that point on, I think that Dick has been very guarded. His privacy, it made him guarded against giving too much of himself or sharing too much of what his beliefs are with writers.
I'd always get burned, either, misquoted or whatever, and make you look like you're stupid.
When he got stung, he started building what a lot of people call now is his crust or his anger or whatever. He shuns people who he thinks is going to take advantage of him. So he's never really got on top of that issue. He's probably got a lot of calluses from it.
Playing in Chicago and being being from Chicago is a great help right there. But you can't play football all your life because there's more things in football, and as you get older, you realize these things.
In the 1965 draft, when the Bears were only 2 years removed from the NFL championship, they selected 2 future Hall of Famers, Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus. But all that promise went unfulfilled after a 9-5 rookie year. In Butkus's last 8 years, Chicago had only one winning season and never reached the playoffs.
Why were they so bad? Here they have this great linebacker. They have this great running back, Sayers. The defense was quite good, and the offense was extremely weak. It was a one-dimensional team, and the defense had to battle furiously to stay in the game.
I remember him at Soldier Field just screaming and yelling at his own players, and I intercepted 3 passes, and he was, as the quarterback was coming off the field, and he was screaming at him, "You He says he wears a blue shirt. He doesn't wear a black shirt. He says throw it to the black shirt."
The offense was so bad when Dick was playing that when the opposition would surrender the ball and the defense, Butkus and company, would walk off the field, as the offense walked on, Dick would say, "Try to hold him, will you?"
When Butkus retired, he held the NFL record for opponents' fumbles recovered, 25. He also made 22 interceptions. But because wins were so hard to come by for the Bears, he had to find his victories wherever he could. Usually that was in one-on-one scrums.
One time I fired out on a sweep and I caught him and I sort of set him to the side. He got mad and he threw a roundhouse punch at me, and I saw the punch coming and I thought, well, what's he gonna do, hurt his hand? When he threw that roundhouse, his fingernail got in and he slipped me right under the eyelid.
We got into the game and about the fourth quarter and we're losing. I think we're down 17. Maybe 2 minutes left. We're on defense. So he calls the play. We go back out. In those days, they didn't go down on one knee.
All of a sudden, Butkus calls a timeout. 10 seconds left, it's first down. Everyone looks like, oh man, what's he doing,
I finally figured out what he was doing. Go running 100 miles an hour and Flanagan snapped the ball, smash him and jump up and call timeout because you want another 5 hits on the guy, before the game was over.
When Chicago played Detroit, Butkus made it personal. It felt like real lions and bears going at each other.
Charlie Sanders tried to make a necklace out of my teeth. He just hit me so hard, cracked me all the way across here. Go back to the auto, I'm bleeding like a pig, and Dick looks at me and says, "What happened?" So what do you think happened?
And a few plays later, Charlie Sanders went over the middle. Dick hit him and caught him right in the chest, right in the head, and leveled him.
The hit was so hard that I actually didn't feel it. You hear people say, well, I was shot. I didn't feel the bullet. I think he hit me so hard it actually numbed me.
Butkus embodied the brawny city for which he played. In his raw passion and ferocity, he was Chicago, the poet Carl Sandburg's city of big shoulders, and the people embraced him. In his first 8 seasons, he averaged 120 tackles and 58 assists and was named to the Pro Bowl every year.
He's a great example of what this city is. I don't think this city is a boisterous city. I don't think this city is a loud city. This city is a strong, hardworking, blue-collar city, and that's what Butkus was.
It's iconic. It became mainstream iconic with Rocky and Sylvester Stallone calling his dog Butkus.
Yo, Butkus! Yo, Butkus!
It represents that aspect of the male personality that goes to war and fights for its country. It's our testosterone, it's our upbringing. Butkus is one of those iconic male figures.
I think the relationship between George Halas and Dick Butkus was one that could be a little bit feisty. George had full control, and so he had the contract issues, and he had the coaching on field.
Butkus got a lot of individual attention. The old man himself, Halas, would go one-on-one with Butkus. He said, "Dick, with your intensity and your ability, you can be a great leader of this team."
Dick Butkus was George Halas's type of player. Halas loved the whole black and blue approach that Butkus brought to life. But George Halas also, loved his money too. Sometimes it took hydraulics to open up his wallet.
Butkus and Halas had to be almost a father and son because they were so alike. George Halas was the son of an immigrant. He had one burning desire, and that was to succeed in pro football. They were probably in constant friction because they expected so much from themselves that they pushed each other, I'm sure, to the limits of their patience.
Dick Butkus came to the end of his career limping and all but helpless, his right knee ravaged.
I just kept thinking back to plays that I was sure he would have made if he were healthy. My empathy was with him, but it was pathetic.
There was a rule, or unwritten rule in the NFL, you get him before he gets you. He intimidated people to the point where they would never take him on face-to-face, so you had a lot of chop blocking and cutting at the knees, and eventually it caught up with him.
Even in his final year, Butkus, at age 30, was still fiercely resisting against the dying of the light.
He became like the wounded water buffalo who was surrounded by these yapping hyenas out there on the Serengeti somewhere, running in packs and grabbing at him.
The saddest time I ever saw Dick Butkus, it was his last game, and I'm telling you, he couldn't walk. He said, "I'm going to play." I said, "Dick, you're not going to make it. You're just like a wounded bear. You're going to go out there." And I said, "They're going to do everything they can to take you out of the game." He said, "I know."
At the end, it was survival, but he was defiant and kept on playing, just bone on bone.
Injections to still the pain were commonplace and dispensed almost casually. In his last seasons, Butkus stayed away from scrimmaging, saving himself for the games. But during the week, a needle in the knee was standard operating procedure.
Dick came into the league with bad knees, and the way he played, it couldn't help but get worse because he was taking shots all the time.
They used to give the cortisone shot like they were giving out aspirins, and they shot his knee. They beat up his knee. They kept shooting it and kept doing all the stuff to it.
Ted Fox was the team physician for the Bears, and his nickname was, from the players, was Needles Fox, because they would shoot up players with painkiller.
On the plane going to the games, Dr. Fox would walk down the aisle with a needle. "All right, you're ready, you're ready, you're ready. You'll play tomorrow." That's the way it went.
During those years, that's how you were coached. That's how the coaches learned. Back in the old days, nothing wrong with you. You can walk and talk and chew gum. Hell, you can play,
The team doctors were really team doctors. They wanted you on that field playing.
If you didn't play, you're in violation of the contract. You couldn't go to any other doctor, so they had you kind of locked.
I remember the utter lack of communication at the time, because I remember Dr. Fox asking me off the record who would have the courage to tell Butkus he shouldn't play. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking? You're the doctor. Because I'm not going to tell Dick Butkus he can't play football.
And all along, he was sending reports. Well, he wasn't writing what was really happening back. Then I had coaches, starting looking at me. They're getting this report. Well, he's okay, And then they're saying, well, why aren't you playing? I said, well, Jesus, don't you get the report, And it dawned on me later that they weren't getting the truth.
Butkus underwent surgical reconstruction on his right knee in early 1971. Over 2 years later, in the summer of '73, he accepted an offer of $575,000 over 5 seasons. But by the end of that '73 campaign, he was relegated to the sidelines, a Bear in name only, injured and frustrated, and the subject of rumors.
The hard part for me during all this was not practicing, which I always did. So that was hard to cope with. It seemed like I caught leprosy and no one wanted to have nothing to do with me.
As the stories continued and the whispering continued and the radio commentary continued to pile against him, even his own teammates weren't near him when he stood on that field. It was alienation, and it was Dick feeling lonely and resentful and angry all at the same time.
George Halas was troubled by the whole thing.
He also had great confidence in Dr. Fox, and it wasn't until late in the game that everybody understood how bad Dick Butkus was.
Every meeting with Hallis was like a conflict, and he had to win it.
I asked him when is the last time he spoke to Hallis and what was said, and he said, Hallis said, expletive, you, get a lawyer. And then Dick said, I got a lawyer.
In May of 1974, just 6 months after he played his last game, a reluctant but embittered Butkus sued his beloved Bears for $1.6 million. Among the charges were breach of contract and negligence.
Dick agonized over the decision. He was angry that this happened and that his first love in life had been stopped because of the knee. He agonized over doing it because he didn't want to necessarily do that to football.
This was a period of time when he realized that it really was a business and that everybody was getting discarded like a piece of meat. He wasn't the first one. He'd seen it with other players throughout his career, and it wasn't just the Bears. This is what happened in the NFL.
He sued the Bears because he had bad knees. You know, bad knees because he hit people 1,000 times. Wasn't anything that the Bears did.
In September of 1976, Butkus received an out-of-court settlement of $600,000. He had left Chicago, exiling himself to Florida. Feeling betrayed and abandoned, he confronted the task of learning to live without football.
He was upset or confused about why he didn't get any coaching offers, not only from the Bears, but from anybody. There was definitely some bitterness.
I think a lot of Bears fans thought that maybe Butkus could have became part of the Bears for a long period of time, but they knew it wasn't going to happen that way because the divorce was so ugly.
This is the period in Dick's life that he'd rather not talk about, nor do members of his family talk about, either publicly or privately. He would never, ever say that he was hurting.
It broke his heart. It was his world, and it had been jerked out from under him. Dick came to Florida to mend and recoup and to regroup.
He was depressed. He was going through the process of death and rebirth. Death as a football player and rebirth as something else. As the something else, he didn't know what it was at the time.
He was in somebody's training camp selling Nautilus equipment, and he dyed his hair. He was going through kind of a goofy phase, and he was bitter, and he didn't like to talk about football, and he never smiled during the whole thing. And as we were walking off the field, two kids in high school jerseys, obviously high school players, came over. They looked athletic and asked for his autograph, and one of them had a big brace on his knee. And he signed for both of them, and he watched them. He stared at them and watched them leave, and he looked, and then he smiled for the first time, and he said, "That one over there is a middle linebacker."
A decade had passed since his retirement before Butkus was reunited with his Bears as a radio analyst in 1985. But still, there were hard feelings. One sore point was the reluctance of Chicago management to retire his number.
There was several years of controversy. Well, should we retire it or shouldn't we? We need the numbers in the 50s, whatever.
George Hallis and he parted on bad terms, so there was a lot of friction between the Bears organization for many years. And once he was burned, you might say, he did not quickly forget what had happened.
On a cold and rainy Halloween night of 1994, the Bears retired numbers 51 and 40. Dick Butkus and Gale Sayers had come in together. They limped out together.
When I played for you, I gave it the very best I could.
And so when they did do the ceremony, instead of saying, "Oh, they did it, this is great," the press is saying, "Well, why didn't it happen earlier?" Well, damn it, how do I know? Ask them.
While his relationship with the Bears has been uneasy at times, Dick Butkus, the perfect Bear, still had the respect of George Hallis, Papa Bear. In 1979, 4 years before the old man died, they exchanged a moment of goodwill.
Hallis came out with his own biography, and Dick went downtown and he went to the bookstore and he said, "Hi, Coach." Hallis looked up at him, said, "Hi, kid," and signed it to the best football player I ever saw.
Dick Butkus was really startled with so many Indian people that he's met that they believe, as he called it, the magic. We call it the medicine. Within Native culture, there's a sharing of certain stories or experiences, dreams, intuitions, feelings, and that's basically an intuitive inner knowing.
Dick believes in everything from ESP to palm readers, even when we were young kids, that he always seemed to be able to sense things before other people.
He looks for spiritual things in all different areas, not only in the Catholic Church, but in the Native American culture. He's just open to hearing the message wherever it's coming from.
The spiritual side of Dick, I believe, is very deep. He feels that the good Lord gave him the body to play football, and it's very personal to him. And most people do not know that side of him.
While he was casting about for something to hang on to, something to sustain him spiritually, Dick Butkus went to prison, not as an inmate, but to serve a ministry. He felt a kinship to those doing time and found a certain solace behind the walls.
It was very tough ministry to be in, but where inmates would not talk to clergy or anyone, that brought happiness to Dick, that he would be able to talk to somebody that probably doesn't speak to anyone else.
I think he thought that God forgives everybody, and maybe it was just a way to find peace and maybe to give back to somebody that gave to him.
When you're in prison, there's a saying, do your own time. And I think we let Dick Butkus do his own time when he was with us. Just let him be one of the guys and hang out, and like we're all in the boat.
Everybody thinks because a player plays a game tough on the field that he's got to be a brute off the field. He's one of the humblest guys off the field I've ever been around. He's a great family man, he's a great husband, great father.
But even Butkus's wife, Helen, and their 3 children have struggled to understand his complex personality.
It's not like he has anything to hide. I think it's just trouble like conveying his emotions. I mean, I'm his son. He has trouble even showing me a different side.
He's a very sensitive person. He just does a very good job of hiding it, but in private things that he brings up that really hurt him would just surprise most people.
He's almost completely opposite of what he was on the field. But, you know, that's him. And I also think that he could easily revert to headbutting somebody this fast. And because he's aware and understands of who he and what he is, he doesn't want to go there.
That he is a sensitive big guy. But I would say this to you, don't cross him. You'll see that sensitivity go right out the window.
I'll tell you, trying to get cultured isn't easy.
Quite without warning, and to everyone's surprise, the introvert turned into something of a ham. Dick Butkus found himself drawn to acting. He soon discovered that he had an aptitude for it, beginning with commercials.
We're not just a couple of animals who can only play football. We can be civilized, too.
The greatest transformation in a human being that I have ever personally witnessed.
We're looking for a nice, friendly game of doubles.
Butkus went from this shy, withdrawn, retiring, almost awkwardly shy person in a social situation to where he went out to Hollywood and became an actor. All these fellas that played with him, they all look at him like, who is this guy?
One day he comes in, he said, I'm taking Shakespeare. I almost fell down. I said, wait a minute, you're trying to tell me you like acting? Yeah, he said, I want to be an actor.
His credits have piled up: feature films, television shows, and numerous commercials.
The acting, I think, is just another example of what made Dick great. He took his language problem like he did his football. He just worked at it and worked at it. He gets this tremendous anger inside, and that anger is his motivation to outdo people and to better himself.
To tell you the truth, I think he's mediocre. I don't think he's good, but he loves it.
He's not De Niro. It just doesn't quite fit, the artsy side of Dick Butkus. It's a contradiction in terms, or it seems to be, and that's because we do make caricatures out of these players. It's unfair to him.
He always felt that he had to prove himself again. First in high school, then in college, then in the pros, then after football. And when he became an actor, he tried to apply the same level of energy to acting that he did to football.
I knew I was not going to be one of the guys running across the stage in leotards. I've done over 200 some commercials now, and been a member of SAG for 30 years, but I can't get rid of the football thing.
I can almost remember every hit and every tackle. Whew, glad that's over, because now I get to relax and enjoy my favorite pastime, barbecuing. And I found the perfect grill to do it with.
He likes to go after a buck. He's got to make a living, and he uses his fame to do that often. He doesn't see the problem with using that name in ways that some people do.
The NFL had forsaken him, he felt, but in 2000, football beckoned Butkus back. The bold and brassy XFL wanted him. He was 57. Being wanted again felt good.
Smash Mouth football was our creed. The XFL.
Dick had his eyes open. I think he knew why they wanted Dick Butkus involved in that concept. He says, if I'm going to be an exploited in any way, shape, or form, as long as I'm compensated, he was going to get involved.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is the personification of the XFL. He is Hall of Famer Dick Butkus.
The XFL was all style, bad style at that, no substance, and all glitz. And Butkus was a testament to a completely different kind of football.
People asked him, don't you think you're putting yourself down by going with the XFL? And Dick's response to that was, I didn't see anybody asking me to be part of the NFL. When you become one of the greatest football players in the last 50 years, you would think some of those calls come, and it's the get even kind of personality that Dick has. Dick will get even.
The XFL experiment lasted only a year, and its passing was largely unlamented. But Dick Butkus found it worthwhile.
He got the biggest enjoyment. I was watching these guys play that normally would never have the opportunity to go play anywhere else. And there were hundreds of them that would come up to him during that season and out of that league and say, Mr. Butkus, thank you very much, because we know you've helped make it possible that we can come and play.
There are a lot of tough guys that played football who remained tough guys, and that's all they ever had. And they became caricatures of themselves later in life. Dick hasn't done that, because Dick has this counterforce, this softness, this empathy, compassion that he learned from his mother. He's a hard read, he's a deep well. I don't think he understands himself all that well, but I think that Dick operates still from instinct, and the things that he was taught will be with him for the rest of his life.
In the first game Illinois played after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963, Dick Butkus seemed to be waiting for Michigan State running back Sherman Lewis at whatever hole the play called for. Wasn't the fullback supposed to block for you, Lewis was asked? He nodded numbly. Well, where was he? I'm not sure, said Lewis, but I think that maybe Butkus ate him. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.